Okay, here we go. So as I said, my name is Dr Sadlier. You're very welcome to this session. So today we're just going to be going through very basic things about academic writing so that you can do as good a job as you possibly can when you're writing your thesis or whatever it is. So I'll go through some various techniques that you can use when you're writing. So the first workshop, as I said, it's basics. Next workshop, which will be on, I think it's the 17th of June, that will be more about research approaches and critical thinking skills. So that'll be a bit more in depth in some ways. Now, the learning outcomes for this particular workshop. So we're going to look at a few aspects of writing that could be useful. So first, to understand the difference between formal and informal writing. So for instance, things like active and passive voice, third and first person, formal tone or more colloquial tone. These are really important to take into account when you're writing in an academic style. Second, we're going to think more about writing structure. So things like paragraphing, signposting in your writing, which are also very important. And third, we're going to try and understand Harvard's citational practice, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, but just to make sure that it's consistent, both in text and in your reference list. Now, you might be asking, like, why does academic writing practice matter? Well, there are kind of a few reasons why it does matter. So for instance, first, it allows us to express our ideas clearly. So there's a particular kind of logic and structure to any piece of academic writing that you do. It also ensures that we're communicating in an appropriate style. So basically, there's a very different style when you're writing a piece of creative writing or a very kind of informal piece of writing like a blog as compared to a piece of academic writing. So we're going to talk about some of those differences. It allows us to reference the work of others clearly and effectively. So, for instance, you're kind of referencing, you know, other scholars that have written relevant work, and you're building up kind of a base of scholarly knowledge. That's essentially what academic writing does. It also offers an opportunity to describe and analyze work within the existing literature. So again, it's all about building a body of knowledge. And it also enables us to showcase our critical thinking skills. So you're not just kind of describing all the stuff that you've read, but also you're analyzing it and basically building up your own argument about a particular topic. So that's what distinguishes academic writing from other kind of more informal pieces of writing. Now, there's a couple of key messages I would try and put out there from this kind of workshop series about academic writing. The first is, if in doubt, check it out. So you need to be very rigorous when you're doing your academic writing from every aspect, really. So if you're unsure of facts, if you're unsure, you know, if you need to back up with relevant figures, make sure you check other relevant sources rather than leaving it to chance. Because also it comes down to, even when you're writing, basic things like checking grammar, syntax, using spell checker functions. Even at that level, it's always important to check that everything is accurate as possible. So that would be my first message. The second one, if in doubt, leave it out. So for instance, when you're editing down work at the end, if you have a lot of extra words that you need to get rid of, think very critically about what needs to be there, what can be left out. So there may be whole paragraphs that, you know, we get very kind of possessive about what we've written, and we kind of think like, oh, well, I like that paragraph, but is it actually necessary to get your argument across? So that would be kind of my second message. So if you think something can basically be gotten rid of, it's not essential to your argument, then don't hesitate, just cut it. So those would be two messages anyway. that I seek to kind of put forward in this workshop. Okay, so we're going to move to kind of the first topic. I'm just going to go through all of this kind of in presentation form, but you're free to look afterwards to look back over it, so you can digest it a bit further. And then we're going to move on to the abstract exercise before moving on to the referencing section. So, well, what's the difference between formal and informal writing? Well, there are several clear differences. So formal writing, it kind of adopts a clear formal language. So for instance, you're not using kind of colloquialisms or slang words that you would just use in a blog or whatever. It's very different than that. As I said, it has to reference the work of other scholars. It's building up a line of argument in doing so. So that's referencing. That's another key element of kind of formal or academic writing, as it's called. It answers or debates a specific question or field. So it's a very focused form of writing and has a clear layout and structure, a logical structure. So this may not, of course, there's structure in all writing, but you know, when you're building up an argument, there's a particular way of doing that in academic writing. And it kind of stands to reason it has to be grammatically correct and well written, which is where, you know, things like spell checkers and all this are very useful. All those points are taken from a Learn Higher document that I have basically at the end of the presentation that you can have a look at if you want to think more about academic writing or formal writing, how it differs from more informal types of writing. Okay, so one of the common issues, and this is kind of the first one I'm going to mention that I sometimes see when I'm, you know, reading people's essays or theses, is basically using the passive voice a bit too much. Now, what is the passive voice? Well, passive voice basically happens when the subject of the sentence has something done to it by someone or something, and active voice occurs when the subject of the sentence is performing the action. Now that might seem a bit confusing, but it doesn't have to be, because I'm going to give you some examples of this. Now, basically, you should try and avoid the passive voice as much as possible when you're doing your academic writing, and aim to use the active voice much more if you can at all possible. So here is a particular example, say, of kind of good and bad practice in this area. So this is a very simple example, and it could, you know, come up in more complex forms when you're writing. But this is the active voice, the first sentence here, which is the one you should kind of aim for. So basically, the salt water corroded the metal beams. So, you know, the salt water is performing the action and corroding the metal beams. So that's a good way of writing, because the subject of the sentence, salt water, is performing the action. Whereas in this second example here, which is the passive voice, which the kind of unhappy face basically says this is not the way you should be writing. The metal beams were corroded by the salt water. So you automatically see here the kind of sentence structure becomes more cumbersome. It's not as neat, because basically you've turned the sentence around, saying, you know, that the object which is being acted upon, which is the metal beams, is being corroded by the salt water. But this makes it less concise, basically. So you need to aim for the first one here, which is the active voice. Less words, it's clearer to the reader. Now that's just a very simple example, and it could come up in a more complex form, as I say, but try to write with the subject of the sentence more than basically kind of a more inactive style of writing, as in the second example. Hopefully that makes sense, but if not, you can ask me at any time. Okay, so that's one example of a particular issue, which is the issue of voice. So aiming for the active voice. Another issue then is failing to reference, which obviously is a particularly bad offense when you're writing kind of an academic piece of work. So basically, it's absolutely essential that, you know, everything you write is backed up by relevant academic literature. Otherwise, basically, if you're just making points out of thin air, it's basically speculation. It's not actually, you know, rigorous work. So you need to back up all points with relevant literature. As I said here, basically, the second point is related. An example of this then is, I'll leave you read this yourself. Basically, I've just kind of, well, made that paragraph up based on, you know, like the second sentence, more or less, which I read about. But there is an issue just with this simple paragraph because, you know, you're talking about a big topic, deforestation, destruction of rainforests. But then the second sentence, 1 football field of forest is destroyed every 6 seconds. I mean, okay, that may be true, but where are you getting that information from? So I know this is a very simple example, but basically that point in the second sentence absolutely needs to be backed up, because you could have just made that up. It may be true that 1 football field is destroyed every 6 seconds, but how do we know? And I think I did actually get that fact from a UN report. So basically that would need to be referenced there in the second sentence. So I hope that example is clear when you read through it, that, you know, you need some, even for something this simple, you need to back it up with some studies that have, especially anything to do with facts, has to be backed up. So simple example, but hopefully get the point across. Common issue number 3, basically, is a lack of focus. Now, yeah, I mean, you can have done all the research in the world on a particular topic or a general topic area, but, you know, if you haven't narrowed it down and you don't know what your line of argumentation is, then that is a big issue, especially when you're, you know, writing at an advanced level, especially if you're doing a master's or a PhD, then you have to have a very clear focus. But basically, it's important for anything you're writing, an essay, you know, short essay, or, you know, something that's not a thesis even, you need to have a particular idea or an argument. Otherwise, you know, your reader is going to be left wondering, what actually is this about and what is the point? So I would say that's very important, having a focus. Research scope should not be too broad, and that is really important. So when you're trying to narrow down a thesis topic, as you might be with your supervisor at the moment, it's really important at the early stages to get your topic kind of precise enough. Otherwise, it'll just be a very, very general piece of work that will have no kind of scholarly value, really. So I've given a very simple example here on this slide. But this is a topic, for instance, and you'll probably be able to see immediately if anyone wants to say anything about it, they can unmute. This thesis will examine the history of shipbuilding from prehistory to the present. Now, I think you probably see immediately what is wrong with this, if this is your thesis idea, even at PhD level, because, I mean, this particular topic could be like the subject of about 20 encyclopedia entries. So yeah, as I said, it's really important. Like, for instance, you could have a topic about the history of shipbuilding, but would have to be talking about a particular period within that history and within a particular context. And you need to have a particular justification for why you're discussing that particular context. So this is, again, a very simple example I've just made up, but it kind of highlights that, you know, like when you're doing a thesis, anything from undergrad up, then it needs to be streamlined and you need to focus on a particular aspect with a particular justification for why you're choosing that. I hope that makes sense, but if not, write in the chat, and or you can say something if you want. Moving on to common issue number 4, which I see quite often.
Dr. Orf,
Sorry?
Sorry, I have a question. Can you answer me now or later on?
And go ahead anytime, yeah.
Yeah, for issue number 2, I think one moment, please. Number 2, failing to reference.
Yes.
Uh, uh, as I see from the example, only I want to reference I should to reference the statics information, or in general, this is only example. I don't understand too much. You see here, he speak. This is a startling statics. Only for statics information or
Oh, it's for many
facts.
things, many things. The most important thing here would be the second sentence, because that is actually a statistic and it was taken from a UN report. So you would need to reference like whatever the reference is. In this particular case, it's the UN report. The first sentence, I would probably reference, a few studies that have discussed the connection between deforestation, destruction of rainforests, and climate change. So you can include a few references in brackets after that one as well. Um, the last sentence is more like an observation here. So the third sentence here. So, in fact, the start of the sentence isn't really necessary. It's a bit, you could edit that part out. Again, I was talking about getting rid of anything that's not really necessary. This is a startling statistic, is actually kind of, you could just take those words out and say this highlights the needs for humans to deal with planetary degradation immediately. That's more an observation, I guess. But definitely the first two sentences, I would reference relevant literature there. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if not, then do let me know if you have any other questions about it.
No, understood.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, no worries. Does anyone else have any questions at this point? You're free to ask. It's okay. Anyone?
It's all clear. Thank you.
Okay, good, good. I'll just fast forward again. Where am I? Oh yeah, use of personal voice, issue 4. Now I'm not totally against the use of the personal voice, because I'm actually from arts humanities backgrounds and we can kind of do it much more freely generally than in science. So I would say in scientific writing, try and keep personal voice a bit more to the minimum. It's not, entirely impossible to do it, but I think the tone should be slightly more objective. So I would use personal voice a bit more sparingly. So personal voice, by that I mean I, me, my, all those words that you would find quite a lot in, say, blogs or anything that you find online that's just written in an informal kind of style. So try and keep it more neutral if you can, for the most part. So, use phrases such as "this research found that," "this research was limited because," rather than saying, "I think that this is the case because," like that's slightly more informal and it's not really necessary or, according to the style of scientific writing. So I would try and keep personal voice much more minimal. Yeah, the main point is to build up a line of argumentation, drawing on work of relevant scholars. You can use the third person. In fact, you use it the most frequently. First person occasionally, but as I said here, like the second person, which is referring to you did that, that should be kind of avoided completely. So yes, you're mostly kind of writing in third person, occasionally the first person when it calls for it. But yeah, generally we don't use you and we too much when we're writing in academic style. But I think I have an example somewhere here. So I've written these two examples on the slide. The first, I would say, is an example of better practice. So basically, this is avoiding the personal voice as much as possible in the first example. So it's keeping it quite neutral. So I'll allow you to read those two examples for yourself. But as you will see, the first example is referring to the other authors. The authors offer various strategies, yet their work can be critiqued on the basis that. So as we see there, I'm not using I, me, my, those words. I'm just avoiding it. And it's completely possible to do that if you write it in a certain way. The second example, which isn't so good, is, I argue that, yes, I also believe that their work, you don't need to use the first person there really. And then it kind of commits the fatal sin of using you could further expand these findings. Yeah, it's just kind of a bit too accusatory. So I wouldn't use you or we too much when you're writing academic style. So you can look back on these examples afterwards, but generally speaking, the first one here is the one to follow in terms of style and tone. Hope that makes sense, but if not, let me know. Fifth error, which relates to the points I mentioned earlier, is just spelling, grammar, and punctuation. There's not too many excuses you can make about this, because we have so many, spell checkers and everything else on programs these days that, you can make sure that everything is written grammatically correct and that, you're using punctuation effectively. Because it does have an impact on how information is conveyed, and it can lead to losing marks, say, unnecessarily because things were not proofread properly, for instance. So I always recommend people to read their work aloud. Just read it to yourself, because when you read something aloud, you immediately see where, for instance, there might be a full stop needed, or where there should have been a semicolon instead of a comma, because of the way when you speak it, then you can hear these things automatically, how it's phrased. So I would really, when you're polishing up your thesis or whatever, always read it aloud, and you'll, find many, many things when you do that, and it will improve things greatly. So use a spell checker, as I say, in advance of submission, so to make sure everything is really accurate. So Microsoft Word has one, as well as many other programs, to make sure everything is accurate. There's kind of no excuse with that one these days, so make sure to do it. So for example, I know these are all very simple, but I see them quite often, some key errors that you will see related to grammar and spelling and things. So there, which is T-H-E-R-E, and there, which is T-H-E-I-R, but they have very different meanings. The first one refers to, location, it's over there. Whereas the second one refers to possession. So for example, their keys. So it's, the keys belong to them, so it's their, T-H-E-I-R. So that is one I see quite often. Simple example, but yeah, do check these things before you submit. Second one is very, very common, affect with an A and effect with an E. Now, affect, it means a process. So basically, you would say that X affects Y. So X has an affect on Y, whereas Y is the effect, which is with an E, of X. I hope that makes sense. So the thing that affects whatever the object is, basically affects with an A. The outcome of whatever that process is the effect with an E. I hope that makes sense, because I see this one very, very, very often. Do ask me if it's not clear. So that's another example. Possession. So whenever basically you're referring to ownership, you need to be including apostrophes. So for instance, the bird's nest, make sure you have the apostrophe before the S in birds, in the singular. If you're referring to a number of birds, make sure the apostrophe goes after the S. Plural and plural possessive, as they're called. Because if you leave out the apostrophe, then it's not grammatically correct when you're referring to ownership. Now, they're just some very simple examples, but they do come up quite often when I'm reading people's work. So do try and take them into account. There are numerous other examples I could mention as well, but I'm not going to. Okay. As I said, stop me at any point. You can write in the chat box as well. But I think now we might be moving on to the abstract exercise. If in doubt, check it out. That was one of my key messages. So yeah, it's important to be rigorous. Oh yes, so you might be wondering why there's a big panda on the screen, but actually, I couldn't get copyright permission for the book I wanted to mention, so it's related to a panda anyway. So it's called Eats, Shoots and Leaves, which is a really good book if you want to. I know it's a very dry subject, but if you want to think more about grammar, punctuation, all of these things that are important to writing, basically this book is a useful one, and it has a nice picture of a panda on the front. It's a really useful one if you really want to polish up your writing. It's probably available secondhand online for very cheap. Writing structure then is another really important thing when we're trying to make sure your argument comes across well. And this is at various levels of writing. For instance, sentences is the first one. So basically each sentence should follow on from the preceding one in a logical order. Then there's the next level, which is paragraphs. So each paragraph should have at least 3 sentences. That's my general rule of thumb. So if you have less than 3 sentences in a paragraph, it's not really a paragraph. So at least 3, I would say. And a paragraph should make it one key point, really, and you can move on to a new paragraph to address a new issue. But there needs to be kind of a logical flow between paragraphs as well. It can't be disjointed and things can't be jumping around. So you need to think about how paragraphs relate to one another. Then there's a level of sections. So basically each section should conclude by providing a brief summary of what has been discussed and a linking sentence to the next section. So this is very important because if you finish a section with no kind of signposting to the next one or to what has gone before, then the writing becomes very disjointed and you're leaving the reader kind of wonder, where is this piece is going, because I don't know what's coming up and I don't see how they're related. So it's really important to have these linking sentences, which are called signposts, essentially. I think I have an example on the next slide of these aspects of writing structure, because they are really important. There needs to be kind of a very logical flow going through all of this. Some useful tips: make every word count. So basically, if you're writing, especially when you're at the latter stages of editing, if you find you have way too many words, then there are various ways of kind of pruning down what you've written. For example, as I said earlier, you might find whole chunks of paragraphs that actually don't have too much relevance, even though you really like the way they're written, but they might not be relevant. And then there's the more minute detail of just copy editing out unnecessary words. So words like in particular or any adjectives that you might have that are not necessary. And you can automatically bring your word count down by, say, hundreds of words just by doing those things. So really make every word count that you've written. Try to get the writing as concise as you possibly can. Which relates to, if in doubt, leave it out, which is kind of my second message for this. Basically, be ruthless, because if you sense instinctively that something is not needed to really convey what you're saying, then just get rid of it. Don't hesitate. You have to kind of, when you're writing a thesis, you kind of have to at some point become an objective reader. So someone who has never seen this thing before, you have to pretend you're someone who's never seen your work before. And then be ruthless and say, right, if I was reading this, would I actually need to see that paragraph there? So you need to kind of come in with that different hat on, basically, when you're polishing up your work. So some issues related to structure then. Logic and flow. So work sometimes lacks structure and flow. This can refer to both, say, the overall structure and the links between sections and paragraphs. This is quite an important issue because everything needs to flow and have a very logical structure, essentially. So this is an example of some connecting sentences. So this is what I was mentioning about. You need to always say what a particular section has done, and you also need to point towards what the next section is doing. So I'll leave you read that example yourself. But basically, this kind of approach saying, you know, this section has demonstrated, in the next section, we will explore whatever it is. So I hope that makes sense in terms of you need to have these kind of signposting elements at the end of every section in order for it all to flow nicely. So you also need to factor that into, you know, your word count as well, that you're going to need some of these connecting kind of sentences between sections. This is an example of overall structure. So there are some issues with this particular kind of abstract I made up here, which you can read through yourself. Because basically you'll probably see when you read through this that the sentences are not in the right order. You can think about what way you would order them yourself. But basically, you know, you should not have the findings as the first sentence of an abstract. That should go right at the end of the abstract. So expected findings. You know, you should start your abstract more with what previous research has found. So basically, you would start this particular abstract with previous research has highlighted that there is. Then move on to this thesis will identify, and therefore this research will ask. Then methods and then findings. So hopefully that kind of makes sense in terms of the order. So in this abstract, which is badly ordered here, you would start with kind of sentence 3, go to 2, go to 4. Then you would have the methods, interviews, and then you would go back to what is currently the first sentence. I hope that makes sense, but just in terms of the order, it doesn't really make sense as it's written on this slide. That's another example. Common error too in terms of structure is sentences that never end. So keep your sentences short and concise. That would be a general rule. It's better to do things that way than to write very, very long, elaborate sentences. It's just easier for the reader if you keep them shorter. You can use commas, colons, semicolons to join sentences as long as it's done in a correct way, which is why I'd recommend you have a look at that Eats, Shoots, Leaves book. It's really helpful with that. But do not let sentences run on for too long. If they can be comfortably divided into, say, 2 or more, just try and keep it as short and concise as possibly can. This is an example of a sentence that just goes on a bit too long. You can read it yourself, but you know, even by reading this aloud, which is what I recommend, you know, rather than just reading it on the paper, you know, in your head, because that doesn't help as much. But even by reading this aloud, you will automatically see that the sentence goes on too long. You can't really say it even in one breath. So basically, even, you know, the last part of the sentence, which seems likely, is not necessary. You could automatically take that out. And actually you could divide, you know, this sentence into 2. You could probably end the first one after climate change and then start a new sentence with the hypothesizing part. Because you know, that would make it a lot clearer for the reader. So now we're on, having gone through, you know, some common errors in terms of, you know, just general writing skills and kind of structure. I know it's a lot to take in probably, but we're going to have these slides on the forum afterwards so you can have a look back and you're free to ask me any questions. So now I hope you've managed to have a look at the abstracts. I'm going to give you a few minutes to look through them anyway before we, think about these questions on the slide here. So what are your thoughts on these pieces of writing? Which do you think is more successful in terms of spelling, grammar, structure, and flow? So I hope you've managed to look at them, but I'm going to stop sharing this screen if I can, and basically going to go back to the Word document where I have the abstracts. Hopefully you've managed to look through them already. Fingers crossed. If not, then you can look through them now anyway. So we'll have a look. And we're going to be ordering these in terms of how well they work, basically at multiple levels. So I'm going to share the writing abstract thing. And I'm going to give you a few minutes anyway to look through each of them. And basically then I've talked too much already in this session, so you're going to tell me what you think, how you would order these, basically starting with the best, going to the worst. There's 4 abstracts. So hopefully you can see that one there. I'll move through them. Basically, maybe 5 minutes or something just to look through them, order them. So you're ranking them in terms of design and layout, presentation of facts, writing practice, which is the most effective and why, and which is the worst and why. So you're starting with the best and you're moving to the worst. So if you want, you can, write in the chat box what order you think would be most appropriate. And also you can unmute after the 5 minutes and just, say what you think, why you would order them that way. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll give you a few minutes and then we're going to discuss them, okay?
Okay.
Okay, I have an answer in 3, 4, 2, 1. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, just one more minute then. Okay, would anyone like to talk about the order they've written and why? So starting from best to worst abstracts, and just to explain kind of why you chose that way. Don't be shy.
Yes.
Yep, go ahead. Who have we?
Me, Wissam.
Hello, okay.
Hello.
Hi, what do you think is the best and what's the worst and why?
I think the best number 3, then 2, then 1, and the worst 4.
Okay. And why did you choose that way?
Why? Because number 3 we have title and results and more statics information, references, and flow. Flow is the best, I think. More facts. Also spelling and grammars, structure and flow, as you see. This is the best, I think.
Okay, great. And what about the other ones then?
I think two.
Yeah.
Woman engineering in Kuwait. Also, it's give facts about. One moment, I will open mine.
Mhm. Yeah.
Also, it's give rational view or sorry, and lectural view from review from historical 1970 till now, and also we have statistical information.
Yeah. Okay, and what about the other ones?
Number 1,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. And why?
Big question, why?
Yeah. Well,
Mm, the flow is good here, but the grammar not, I think not too much, because he use we, and you speak before not to use we, I.
yeah.
Mm, I think it's bad.
Mhm. Okay, and then that all makes sense. And then number 4. What do we say about number 4?
Number 4 is the worst, because I don't understand anything
Yeah.
about neural network and fuzzy logic. He speak in general, and you speak before you. We shouldn't use or expand the title of abstract, only to focus on something. I think that.
Yeah. I think they're all very fair points. I would actually agree with quite a lot, but I'm going to let other people say what they think before I say anything. Anyone else want to come in with what they think in their order?
Yeah, well, yeah, from my end, well, giving them the marks 4, 1, 2, 2, starting with the abstract 3. I mean, in general, I don't want to be too negative, but they're all poorly written, if you would ask me. There's a lot of errors, misspelling, and then using the informal language and the structures. It's just, yeah, it's everywhere and nowhere. But if I need to pick, it would be abstract 3, just because there is a structure to it. It follows it. So in a sense where we have introduction and then methods, results, and the conclusions. In abstract 3, again, I think there's a lot of passive voice, active, plus the commas are added where they should not be. And then some other areas we have a misspelling, like results in were reported to have favorable study. So it's a non-British variant. So it's a mix of the American English and the British English. But I think the structure itself, it kind of conveys a message at the end, you know. So there is a head and tail in abstract 3. Yeah. I think that the title could be slightly shorter. It's a bit too long. And then moving on the abstract 1, as Sam said, it's written in informal tone, so it's wrong.
Yeah.
And the title, elements of an optimal experience, that can be anything.
Yeah. Very, very, very vague. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And then obviously, missing commas here and there. And then the passive voice, it's quite active. Abstract 2, I like the title actually. It kind of, there is the best title of all 4, I would say, the most accurate one, or like brings the message. The major findings, when that sentence starts, and then we have like a bullet points A, B, C, D. It's a bit of a mess. I would avoid doing it. Maybe structuring it better so it has that sentence flow. But the information is there. It's just the way how how it's structured could be way better. And then again, the missing nouns and commas, etc. The abstract 4, yeah.
What do we say?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what they're talking about here.
Yeah, I don't think any of us are. But
It's a lot of misspelling, and obviously grammarly it's bad. That's from my end.
bad. Thanks for that. Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of similarities in what people think. Does anyone else want to say anything about their numbering? Don't have to. I mean, if you don't want.
Everybody has more or less covered it.
Okay. Yeah. I like, there is an element of kind of subjectivity to how you would order things, and sometimes it's depending on what discipline you're in, what might be more acceptable, and etc. But generally speaking, I think we're on similar pages. As we said, like abstract 3 is generally quite well structured. There is a kind of clear focus of the study. There's kind of lots of relevant details provided about, stats and the procedures that were done and all of these things. Like, it's not perfect, but yeah, as you said, there is some mixing. Actually, I didn't actually notice up until now of different styles of English. So you should try and avoid that as well as much as possible. Probably the title is a little bit cumbersome, all right, but generally speaking, it's kind of the best in terms of structure, flow. Like, it's a stylistic thing. You don't have to have a heading for each different section. You can if you want. It also depends on if you're submitting to a journal, what journal you're submitting to and stuff like that, as they might say you need to write an abstract in a certain form. So sometimes you could actually remove these kind of subheadings here and just have it with each of these 4 paragraphs without having to label them as such. but overall it's the best in terms of flow, structure, the material that's actually included within it. If I were doing this exercise, I would probably choose abstract 2 as the second best. So I agree with Sam on that one. Title, as Luca mentioned, is good. It's clear, and we know immediately what it's all about. It's quite well written. Again, it's sort of a stylistic thing with these, you know, A, B, C, D in brackets. Provides a good kind of overall overview of the topic. Some bit about findings, although that could have been expanded on a little bit. There's not too much about the kind of methods that were used to kind of, you know, they could have said more about, you know, what actually did they do to come to these findings. That was a bit ambiguous. But still, overall, I would probably say it is better written and flows a bit better than abstract 1, because it's a little bit fuzzy, as in what the hell is an optimal experience, for instance. Yeah, it's just a bit vague, everything that's written here. You know, it's like there's not too much context given about, you know, why this study was conducted, or, you know, then the language that is used. Yeah, I would kind of generally avoid using we too much, or you use it very, very sparingly, not as kind of the main way of writing an abstract. So it's just a bit vague, it's a bit too brief, there's not enough context given in this, and the sort of language that is used is kind of a bit limited. So I would probably put that as, you know, second worst. And then I don't think any of us need to say much about abstract 4. It's just like, what the hell is fuzzy logic? And then there's spelling errors. Be believe, that should be we believe, and you shouldn't really even use we too much. And you're kind of just left wondering, like, what, you know, what is this thing about? What did you actually do to come to these very ambiguous sort of statements? So yeah, I think if I were, you know, ordering, it's just my perspective, I would say 3, 2, 1, 4, but we're all, you know, more or less along the same page, which is sort of good. Good, so I hope that exercise was helpful. But that's the way you need to be thinking when you're writing your own abstract, and when you're kind of critiquing anything you're reading and seeing, like, what, is it well written or not? The best way, if you want to be a good writer, you have to also read a lot and look at how other writers write. So that's important. Now I have a brief section. I'm just going to move back onto the slides on referencing. And then, sorry, this is going to run over a little bit, but I hope that's okay with you. Because referencing is very, very important, and it's not always done. It's not always done that effectively, and it doesn't need to be. Whoops, I played from start, so I'm going to have to fast forward. It doesn't need to be like a mystery or anything. We're using Harvard referencing at MLA, so it's a very, very simple style of referencing. Whereas other methods of referencing, like if you're using Chicago referencing or things like that, it's much more complicated, and it gets a bit confusing, to be honest. So you're relatively lucky that you have Harvard referencing, put it that way. I have some example on the slides there.
The share not clear for the.
Sorry?
For the slides,
Yeah,
share.
no, I played from the start by accident, so I'm back here. So referencing, yeah, as I said, it's a crucial part of academic writing. So Harvard needs to be consistent, and that's both in terms of layout and punctuation. Like, so both aspects are really important. And basically, there's no excuse for referencing. You kind of just follow a manual that tells you exactly how you reference every type of source. So do have a look at the, say, how to reference guide on the TLP to make sure you're doing everything correctly with that. Yeah, it's like a formula, essentially. So, nuts and bolts of Harvard referencing. Now, this is all covered in the How to Reference guide, so do have a look at that. But basically, when you're referencing a source in text, it's really simple. You just need to reference the surname of the author, comma, space, and the year of publication within a set of brackets. So open bracket, close brackets, and that's all you need. It's very, very simple. So whenever you're referencing a source, that's all you need to do. If you include a direct quotation, so in quotation marks, then you need to also include a page number. So that's really important. As if you just quote something and don't just include the surname and year of publication, it's not referenced correctly actually, because you need to say exactly where in the source it came from. So say page 76 or whatever it is. Because you often see like quotation marks not being fully referenced, so that is an issue. There's a slightly different format if you start a sentence with the surname, so it becomes surname and you just put the year of publication in brackets then. So I'm going to give some examples on the next slide so you can see that very clearly. Yeah, note the placement of brackets, that's really important.
Ma'am, actually, I have a question.
Yes.
This is Mohit from India.
Yes, hi.
Yeah, hi, ma'am. As you said, like we have to write an abstract and we have to write a summary of an entire article.
Yes.
Introduction, objective, approach, and the result. We have to add in that, and
Yeah.
systematically we have to write everything. The question I have, like, how to avoid the plagiarism, like how like we are going to use the incidents happen. So like I have a project on ISM and I have to cover a few of the things. What are the incidents happen, and then on that I have to write what are the mistakes and what has to be rectification on that. What are the trainings required and other things. So how to avoid plagiarism, like how, that was my question, that is my doubt.
Plagiarism, you just need to absolutely make sure everything is just written in your own words. So yeah, unless you're taking like big chunks of information or you're just, taking paragraphs and changing a word or two here and there, that's also plagiarism, by the way. Even if you just take a few sentences and change one or two words, it's still plagiarism, essentially, if you're taking the ideas without crediting someone else. But always, if you write in your own words, so whatever it is you're writing about, that you've done your own work, you write in your own words, you're not just taking paragraphs of text from other people's work and not crediting them, then if you follow those steps, there can't be any plagiarism, really.
So so the thing is, like, we are reading a story and then we have to write it in our own language. That is what it is.
No, it's not just that. I mean, basically, you have to
yeah.
build up your own line of argument. So it's not just describing a string of texts or, basically regurgitating what some other author wrote. When you
because
write
because the discussion will start after you are covering the whole incident, like this was happened and what was wrong in that. So this is from the text, from the online or whatever the journals are available on net. But after that you have to like I'm writing it, so I have to put my point where they went wrong, like what can be done right after that. So but the half of the 50% of the section of this journal is about I have to take data from net, and 50% I can write like what can we do to improve the training and on the personal safety and on other things. But the 50% part, sorry man, yes, go ahead please.
I'm not sure if I'm totally getting the question you're asking, but basically any study that you do, it's fine to draw on data as long as it's referenced correctly and that you're just writing about it, not that you're taking whole chunks of paragraphs from a journal article that's been written about this. That would be plagiarism. But that you've actually got a topic, you've read the relevant literature, you write about it, you describe and analyze it, and then you know, write about your own conclusions. That's essentially what a thesis is. It's not about taking chunks of someone else's text or argument and then just kind of piecing it together, because that's plagiarism. And you have to reference all the studies you've consulted, but you're not, I have to stress, you're not taking chunks of other people's text or just changing it minimally, because that's like academic offense.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Yeah, okay, I hope that makes
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks.
Oh, great. Okay. Back to referencing. It's, well, you all know about referencing, I think, so I'm not going to spend too much longer because this is already run over. Reference this, start from A and go to Z, according to the author's surname. There's different types of sources which have different referencing formats. So essentially, it's like you just follow the formula for whatever source type you're dealing with, and everything will be fine. Punctuation also needs to be consistent. So for instance, you need to take note of where commas go, where italics go, and the title of it, you know, title of a journal is usually in italics. The title of the article itself is not, things like that, to try and keep it as consistent as you possibly can. Here is an example, so that I was mentioning. This is a journal article. So you'll note the format here. So surname, initial, year, title of article, title of journal, which is in italics, volume and issue number, page numbers. That's the basic format for a journal article. In text, this becomes, so you'll see Zandonella, comma, space, year in a set of brackets. But if you start the sentence with Zandonella argues, then you have Zandonella with just the year of publication in brackets. So do note that slightly different formatting, because yeah, often see it done incorrectly. So now I know that's been like a whistle stop tour through everything, and like you like, if you have any questions, I'm free to ask to answer anything you have at the end. But I'm just going to review the learning outcomes first. So in this workshop, hopefully we've kind of began to understand the difference between formal and informal writing. So active and passive, third and first person, formal, colloquial, and to know that, you know, you need to avoid colloquialisms and kind of passive voice and first person in academic writing. Second, to think more about writing structure. So for instance, paragraphing, signposting, so making sure you kind of highlight what a section has discussed and what the next section is going to discuss, and do that throughout your thesis. And then it'll be a kind of more, it'll have a better flow. And then to understand and be able to use Harvard citational practice, so in text and in reference this, I'd encourage you to look at the how to reference guide for all details of that, because essentially, as I said, it's like a formula that all you have to do is follow it and you'll be fine. There are even referencing tools and softwares that you can use now, like Zotero and like EndNote and all these things. I personally have never used them. You just need to make sure they're set to the right format to start with, because there are always variations on Harvard or whatever style of referencing you're using. But some people use it and find it helpful. Otherwise, you can do the manual approach that I've just described. It's very simple. Right, so take home messages. If in doubt, check it out. If in doubt, leave it out. Here are references that you might be, you know, might want to have a look at that I mentioned in the presentation. That is me. Actually, my email address is different now, but if you use that email address, it should still get to me. But it's at mla.ac.uk now, because we changed domain.
Aoife, sorry, I don't think you're sharing the right screen. Did you try to share a screen or?
No.
Okay.
No, so you can still see presentation, right?
No.
Oh.
But we follow with our slides, no problem.
Right. Don't worry
But
about
for the email address changed to
it.
domain mla.ac.
Yes, it's basically at .ac.uk. I'll
We
write.
see mla-uk.
Yeah, so I'm going to write in the chat box so you have it here. mla.ac.uk. I think the old email address would probably still work, but because I think the stuff is still going through to it, but that's my new one. If you want to email me about any of this. Yeah, so does anyone have any questions?
No question.
No?
Thanks. It's nice lecture.
I do have one question, and it's related. I'm okay with referencing and the writing style. However, I'm going to be, for my dissertation thesis, I'm going to be actually presenting the live project that I'm going to be assigned to. So I asked my mentor within the company to assign me to the project to cover the specific topic. So now, since that project actually has the end client and there is a non-disclosure agreement signed with the client, I'm going to have to be very careful in terms of what I'm disclosing with regards to the information, but also, I'm going to have to find a way to present the case, but also to avoid, obviously, being disclosing information that I should not be doing. So I'm just trying to find a way. Maybe we can take a one-on-one session later on, or like in coming weeks. I'm a bit kind of in walking on a thin line. It's a gray area.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, there's always sort of ethical issues involved in this sort of work, isn't there? Yeah, I mean that's probably an area I can have a one-to-one conversation with you about it. It's a tough one, but yeah, it's all in what sort of terms you've agreed with whatever organization you're talking about, but yeah, we can maybe talk about that.
All right, then it's better one-on-one, because it's interesting topic. It's something that I really want to be writing about,
Sure.
and it's give me ability to actually write a report and be part of the research team. However, the information shared will be a generic in one way. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely would need to write about all of that in, say, your ethics section in your thesis.
Yeah.
And as long as everything is covered in that, and that you're very clear with what you've agreed with the case you're writing about, then it should be fine. But obviously, there are kind of gray areas for sure. It can make it really challenging. So
yeah, I am still trying to get them, waiting for their response to
right.
give me a written consent that I can use it for the paper.
Right. I would try and keep following up with them, because that is like kind of the very crucial part of this. It's like,
yeah, exactly. So it's, for me, that is kind of a plagiarism, because I mean, it is my work, but it belongs to someone else legally.
Right.
It's a kind of, all right, no problem. I'll take it one-on-one with you, and maybe later on with the Carlos, because it's really something that I want to do, but I have to be careful how I navigate through the process.
Sure, yeah, it sounds a bit complicated, to be honest, but yeah, I would keep following up with them, because that's sort of the crucial part. You need consent, otherwise you can't do
yeah, I'm gonna need to write abstract number 4 then. About nothing.
Yeah, well, let's fingers crossed it all.
Yeah, all right, no problem. Thank you so much.
Right, anyone else, any other questions? Was it useful? Always useful to get some feedback. Sorry, I'm kind of new to using Teams for workshops, so sorry if anyone was really disjointed, because it was kind of like, what window am I on at the moment? Anyway, hopefully it was useful for you. This recording is going to be on the forum as well, if you want to look back at any of the examples or anything like that. Or if you want to email me about anything, just, use the new email address I put in the box. Okay, if that's all right with you, I'm going to end this call. So hopefully see you on the next one, which is arranged, I think, for June 17th at 11 a.m. UK time. So I'll be on then. So next one will be more about critical thinking skills, which could be useful for as you write your thesis. So yeah, nice to see you all. Take care.
Nice to see you.
Hopefully see you.
Thank you.
And all right.
Bye
Bye.
bye.
Thank you so much, Eva. Have a good day. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye bye.